Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Welcome back to Hopeful Hump Day, your midweek dose of hope to get you over that hump. Today, we are welcoming a new guest with us, Elaina Jones. Elaina is a single mother, a learning and development consultant, a mental health counselor in training, and a podcaster. But today she is here to discuss one of the most challenging times of her life, one life, not lives, where she experienced a real severe depressive disorder. And throughout that episode, realized that she didn't really trust or love herself. And she felt like all aspects of her life were suffering, felt stuck, and dissatisfied, both personally and professionally. So just kind of like this perfect storm, I guess. Throughout that, she realized she was seeking validation, outside validation, to make her feel better about herself. That showed up in her relationships, friendships, her career. And those things were failing to make her happy. And she realized that and realized she needed to make a change. So today, she's going to share with us how she learned to love and trust herself again. She'll also share she's created a podcast called Cope Queens, and she discusses mental impairments, self-care, self-acceptance, self-love. We were actually even given the opportunity and privilege to be a guest on her Cope Queens podcast a while back to talk about Hope Warrior Project. So we are excited to have her here today. Elaina and I actually worked together a few years ago in a corporate office, and so I'm really excited to have her join us today. So welcome, Elaina.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I always enjoy when the three of us can get together and chat. So thank you for the.
Awesome. Yeah, love it.
Yeah, so thank you so much for joining us. And so take us back to kind of the depression and your take. What do you think led up to that?
Yeah, sorry, I just all of a sudden I touched my eye and now my eye is burning. Um, yeah, so I would say between, the depression really kicked in around 2012. And at that time, I was miserable. I didn't want to be around myself. I'm surprised I had any friends who wanted to be around me. It's interesting that when I talked to my mother about it, she was like, I didn't realize you were going through those things. But I just felt like I was stuck in this holding pattern where I wasn't doing anything that I loved. I wasn't accomplishing anything that I was passionate about. I even didn't think that I was worthy to be the mother of my child. There was just so much displeasure and dissatisfaction with just every aspect of my life.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more like about like how that showed up. Like what were you going through? Like how were your emotions kind of like affecting your everyday life?
Oh yeah. So the first thing that I noticed is even like if I got a new position at work or was working for a new company, no matter what I was setting out to achieve, it wasn't good enough. I was still unhappy. It didn't matter how much money I was making. It didn't matter what the position title was. I was just miserable. There were days that I didn't want to get out of bed. There were days that I would show up at work and would cry in the parking lot because I didn't want to go inside. Um, I was angry. My emotions would go from highs and lows. I was putting my happiness in the hands of others. And what I mean by that was, it was like if I was dating someone, I sought to them to make me feel better about me. It was a way that I could kind of validate that I was worthy of love and that I was a person worth loving. But in reality, I still wasn't satisfied. I wasn't happy. And I wasn't even happy with the people that I dated. yeah. But because they were giving me the attention that I was seeking at the time, it felt like something was happening. I probably ended a lot of friendships during that time. My friends would always want to hang out and go out, and I was making excuses to not go. I was always busy or I wasn't feeling well. I developed back spasms. I was stressing myself out to the point my hair was falling out. I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping. And the result of me not sleeping and taking care of myself, I think between 2012 and 2014, I had had 4 car accidents. 3 of those were my fault. Twice, my daughter was in the car with me. I remember one day I was leaving, I was so distracted, like all the time. I was leaving for work, and the routine was I would drop her off to my mother's house before going to work. I got halfway to work and realized she was still in the back seat of the car. That's how just distracted I was. Um,
When
I
you say, can I ask a quick question about that? When you say you were distracted, what was it? Was it like a constant barrage of thoughts going through your head, or I mean, what was the distraction?
it was just I would just going through the motions. It was I was getting up, getting ready, but I wasn't really focused. I wasn't really present in the moment. And I would just have all these random thoughts coming up of things that I knew I was going to have to do in a day that I didn't want to do, and how can I get out of doing it. And it didn't matter. I was worried about everything imaginable, finances, you know uh, make car maintenance, whatever it was causing me not to be present in the moment. And I think that's when the depression really started to kick in, because if I wasn't ever present, then how was I being as a mom? Was I giving my daughter the love and attention that she deserved? And it got so bad to the point, and what really triggered me to seek therapy was, I woke up one morning and I was standing in the bathroom and I was looking at myself and I didn't know who I was. I mean, I felt like I had no identity. And there was even a thought of, would my daughter be better off without me? You know, would she have a better life if she was being raised by my parents? Would she better have a better life if she was raised by my cousin, who's also her godmother? Would she have a better life if I wasn't here? And I realized, like, not only do I not love myself, but I don't trust myself in this moment. And I had to get help. There was no way that I was going to make it through that on my own.
Yeah,
There was no way.
yeah.
There was no way.
And
So,
thank goodness you realized that. And I know a lot of people, there's still some stigma, I think, around getting help. And I
yeah,
know, I think you talk about some of this on your Cope Queens podcast, right? I mean, we need help sometimes. I
yeah,
always liken it to, if I've got something wrong with me physically, I'm going to go to the doctor, right? I'm not going to try to bandage my broken arm, but for some reason, like, we don't think about it the same way when it comes to our mental health, which is a part of our health.
yeah. We look at it as, like, I grew up in a culture where it's like you just push through. You push through, you get it done, you make it happen, and you don't complain about it. Complaining about it is selfish. It's immature. It's just an excuse, and that's how it's viewed. And so there was a lot of shame and guilt in the fact that I ever even felt bad, because a lot of people on the outside looking in would be like, you have your health, you're making money. I actually had someone tell me that I was dating at the time, like, you're complaining about this job, but look how much money you're making. It didn't matter to me. It didn't matter. I was miserable.
Yeah.
And I remember right after I started therapy, my mom called me, and she had been reading a book by T.D. Jakes called Instinct. And she was like, you really should check this book out. And I was like, I'm not real religious. And so I was like, I don't want to be preached at. But, she told me to check it out. So I checked it out. And really, the book was just about um, really listening to that voice that's telling you on the inside who you are and what you want out of life. And I think that time, that's something that I was missing. I wasn't listening to that voice because I was just trying to push through.
Mhm.
I was just trying to get the bills paid. I was just trying to survive. And I was miserable with just trying to survive. I didn't want a life where all I was doing was surviving.
Right.
Because then at that point, it's like, what's the point? And so it helped me just kind of refocus and recenter and really have a honest conversation with myself to say, here's the life that I want. here are the things that I want to do. Here's how I want to contribute to society. And once I was honest about what it was I wanted, then it was figuring out how do I achieve those things.
Yeah. So that's the big question, right? I mean,
Yeah.
first step, I get awareness.
Yeah.
There's a problem. Secondly, what do I want out of this? But then, okay, how do I make it happen?
Yep.
So how did that work? How did you find what helped you?
Well, I really had to go on this journey where had to figure out how could I trust myself again? How could I figure out what would it take for me to have confidence in me and to accept me and appreciate me, but trust myself that the decisions that I make are the right decisions. And just as an example, one of those transitions was I was not happy as a full-time employee. And between 2012 and 2015, I probably worked for um, 4 or 5 different companies. And even in 2 of those roles were exactly what I said that I wanted. But when I got it, I was miserable. And so I realized that even as a learning and development consultant, it was something that I enjoyed doing, but it wasn't what my heart was telling me I wanted to do because I wanted to be somebody that could help other people. But I wasn't in a position to make any of that happen because I was so restricted by my work schedule and what I did when I did it. And so one thought I had was, I had thought about contracting and consulting because that was kind of on my own terms, but it's so scary to walk away from a full-time position because you have this false sense of security when you're a full-time employee because you're like my check comes once a week, it comes every other week, it comes twice a month, and it's always going to be there is what we tell ourselves. I think in this pandemic some of us have learned that is not always the case. And so I knew in order for me to feel confident in the decision to transition into a consultant, I was going to have to get my finances together because I am definitely that person that I need that evidence. I need to be able to see for myself what the results are, because in that way I can plan my next step. I can be prepared. And so I spent a lot of time. I probably spent at least a year and a half to 2 years just getting my finances together, getting my savings together, so that I knew if I was going to be on a project that was only going to last 3 months, that I was going to still be able to take care of my household. And what I learned in that process was that I I was able to trust myself and I could trust the decisions that I made and the choices that I made. And I didn't need anyone else's validation. I was validating for myself because I was able to prove to myself that I could do it. And with that, I started learning how to accept me. Yes, I am very flawed on many levels, right? Because I'm human and we're all flawed. And it was getting to the point where I was just like, you know what? I accept it, I surrender to it. It doesn't mean that I don't still seek ways to self improve, but I don't allow those to define me. I allow my character and my heart to define who I am. And those around me who embrace that, great. If it's something about me that you don't embrace, that's great too. Do you and I'll do me. But I no longer was confined or restricted in my thoughts and feelings where I relied so much on other people. I had just decided that this is who I am. I accept me. You can accept me or not. And I remember probably since my daughter was 3, I've been telling her whole life that the only opinion of you that matters is the one that you have of yourself. But that wasn't something that I was living until that moment. When I made that transition and was really honest with myself, it was like, you know what? You're awesome, you're amazing, live your life, and you don't have anything to prove to anyone but yourself. And once I proved it to myself, it was like the whole world had changed. My whole world view changed. I think by trusting myself allowed me to trust others, somewhat. I do still have a social anxiety disorder. So trusting others is not that easy, but I'm getting better. um, but it just really came down to I was able to trust myself. I learned to accept me for who I was. I was able to define the person that I wanted to become. And within that, I felt like I started to love myself. Because I don't think that before that moment that I truly understood what it even meant to love myself.
The pride is just the freedom that you felt, you're carrying this burden and this baggage of relying on other people to validate us and to make us feel. I mean, that's it's a burden to carry, to be quite honest, because then you're always feeling like, well, you got to then do something to make those people validate you. It's this vicious circle,
Yep.
and not having to carry that burden must have been very freeing, I would think.
Yeah, there was a lot of freedom that came with that. I felt like you said, like a burden had been lifted. This weight, I didn't feel that weight. I wasn't carrying that around anymore. I allowed myself to just embrace who I was, and just I was free from that, from everything else. I have not had a severe depressive episode since 2014. I do still struggle sometimes with my managing my anxiety, but it's not something that I have to be medicated for. I know when my anxiety is kind of taking over. There's a few coping mechanisms that I've, you know, ad- have adapted to. Like I have my lovely chakra bracelet, and I put my essential oils on it, and I meditate, I color. I feel like when my, thoughts start to get a little out of control, I can recognize it a lot sooner. And I think that was the important aspect of going to therapy, was because then I was able to identify and recognize my triggers so that I could be proactive rather than reactive. Because what was happening during the time, like the depressive episode, was my anxiety was so much out of control that I had the depressive episode. And so I just think that learning how to deal with those things that was overwhelming me really helped me to be able to be more proactive. And so now I know, if I'm not sleeping for 2 days, I need to pull myself back and figure out what's causing this, and let's address it. And so that's where I think really settling into your thoughts and feelings, and just letting them happen is where you learn so much about ourselves.
Yeah. Well, and you've obviously learned a lot about yourself and about coping. And I keep using this word coping, and it always brings me back to your podcast, Cope Queens, I mean, which makes perfect sense. So talk about how are you using what you learned today in your own life, and then as you're sharing it with others through your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So we all cope, and it's just a matter of, if we're coping in an adaptive manner, which is positive and healthy, or if we're coping in a maladaptive manner, which is unhealthy and making the situation worse. So no matter what we're going through, we find some way to cope. And so what I've learned is to identify those adaptive coping skills that help me through the situation, so that it improves the outcome rather than put me in unnecessary risk. And so that's one of the things that Cope Queens brings to the table is there are there's a million mental health podcasts that you can listen to, and many of them are very clinical, and some of them are just down to earth. And I try to get Cope Queens to be a down to earth, something that's relatable, to say, look, we go through these challenges, and it's okay to not be okay. But let's learn how to cope adaptively to whatever situation you're in, so that you can thrive rather than just survive. Because there definitely is a difference. And I also really advocate for, I had a conversation with my cousin a few years ago, and we were talking about, we used to dream, we had big dreams as kids. And then as you grow up and you get these responsibilities, we kind of put all those dreams to the back burner. And I think that's where the disconnect is for a lot of us, is we have this inner pull that's really trying to get us to do something that we're not on the path of doing. And that's where that internal struggle for me was rooted in. I was ignoring what that pull was because I didn't feel I was prepared to take that journey. And I just had to go this way because I thought that was the way to go to support my family. And so I just think that, I share those experiences on the podcast, and guests come on and share their experiences just of how everyday situations um, can really impact our mental health if we don't respond to them in a healthy way. So.
Very good.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, there's been so many awesome insights throughout this whole interview. So thank you so much for sharing all that. Nilda commented #trust yourself. And I think that's perfect. Like, she nailed the whole message on that. It's like we grow up and so many people are influencing us because it's normal, right? Because we're growing up and we're looking around as to who we should be and how we should act and what we should do. And it's so easy to just get so caught up in all the voices, all the noise around us, that inner voice, and gosh, why is it so quiet, right? Why do we have to get so still to hear it? And maybe there's a big reason to that, but yeah, like, you really have to hear that quiet voice under all the noise, right? That's constantly being yelled at us. So, and then when we hear that voice, that's when we can trust ourselves. And then something else that stuck out to me was that you were saying you're working on trusting others. And I think it goes right back to that #trust yourself. The more you trust yourself, the more you can trust others, because then you know that they can't hurt you, right? Because no matter what they do, like, you're still going to have yourself, and you know that you have what you need to shift, pivot, do what you need to do, and keep moving forward.
Yeah.
So it really just like takes their power away.
Yep, absolutely. And I think a lot of times we look at that self inner critic as a negative. I recently had a conversation with Connie Ann Holman, who is um, a life coach and counselor, and she shared with me that that inner self critic is really, it's our anxiety in a way, but they're trying to keep us safe. And so when you mentioned that voice is so quiet. So one thing that I did to basically have a relationship with my inner self critic, I gave her a name. So I named her Harley. And so when that way I can make sure that I can be present with Harley to hear what Harley's concerns are and address it in a way that works for me, but lets her know, like, look, Harley, I know you're concerned about me doing this, but I got this. I've proven to both of us that I got this handled. So that was one of the things that I did, just so that I was acknowledging that inner self critic. I think sometimes we try to run from it, but you really have to. I truly believe that in order for you to truly understand yourself and truly get to a point of self acceptance, you have to hear what that inner self critic is saying, and you can't ignore it. Ignoring it is not going to help you move forward in life. It's not going to help you accomplish your goals and your dreams, because there's something that it's trying to make you aware of that you may not consciously be accepting in this moment. And so I encourage everybody to just sit in silence, allow that inner self critic to come to the surface, and allow whatever thoughts, feelings come up, let them reach the surface, and don't judge it. That was a big issue for me. I was feeling like my feelings were either good or bad. They're not, they're just feelings. And I think that's the point that we all have to get to, is where you just feel what you feel without judging it or labeling it.
Totally. And Katie said she needs to be reminded that it's okay to not be okay. I can totally second that completely, that she feels weak when she doesn't feel okay, and that makes her think that that's not okay. And Nilda says that the quiet voice can cause a huge ruckus in our life. And you know what? I think that when we do start listening to those voices, it does cause a lot of, like, it's like a ripple effect that turns into big waves. And sometimes it scares us, so we back off. but it's like, no, that means it's working. That means you're making change. Um, and sometimes things get a little crazy for a while, but you just kind of have to hold on,
Yeah.
hold on and keep listening and keep just trying to figure Harley out, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
Harley.
Yeah. I, I tell everyone, I say, you know what, name your inner critic and develop a relationship with them. So yes, sometimes that inner critic, Harley does cause a ruckus. Absolutely she does. And it's even sometimes where I'll be like, look, Heifer, I need you to just get off my back for just a moment. Um, but, there is something, but I also have realized that she's looking out for me.
Yeah.
She's looking out for me. Our instinct is to protect ourselves and to survive and not put ourselves in a harmful situation. So anything remotely looking like change, that inner self critic is like, nope, we don't want to change, because change means something is going to be different and we don't know what it's going to be.
Right.
But if you allow yourself to just feel it and acknowledge it and then say, okay, how am I going to prepare if I take this direction? And then when you have that confidence in yourself and you're like, you know what, here are the things that I can prepare. Because I am definitely, like I mentioned before, I need that evidence. And so I have to have a measurable goal so that I can look back and say, I didn't accomplish it because of X, Y, and Z. Not because of me, but because of, maybe something in the plan wasn't correct. Um, or I can look back at it and say, I accomplished this because I did do it this way. And so I think a lot of times we just don't give ourselves enough credit that we can figure it out, and we just have to trust ourselves. But I don't think that we get to that point of trusting ourselves until we're truly honest with ourselves. And that's the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
Can't just look at the good.
The ugly will keep screaming. Okay, so we're running out of time. So take over Hope Warrior Project for us for today. Please give us your insight and mindfulness question.
Yes. So insight is, when you allow yourself to just sit in your feelings and feel without judgment, you uncover things about yourself. Okay. And the question is, how will you prepare to deal with what you learn or what you uncover?
I love it.
Good.
So good. And if anybody wants to follow you, how can they find you? What's your podcast, or if you have anything else that they can go find?
Yep, absolutely. So the podcast is called Cope Queens. It's available on all the major platforms. So Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, all of those. You can also locate me. We have a website, copequeens.com, Facebook, Instagram at Cope Queens Podcast, and Twitter at Cope Queens.
Awesome. So yeah, recommend go check out the podcast. I love the name of it, and I love that you are doing this. It's awesome to see someone doing something, making something happen that they really are passionate about and love doing. So, and it's going to be, I mean, you're helping other people, which you said that's what you wanted to do. So that's awesome to see. Well, thank you, Elaina, so much for joining us today. This was a real pleasure for me to see you again. Also, we used to sit right across from each other and look at each other every day, when we worked together. So don't get that pleasure anymore. So this was really great to have you on our show. So thank you for doing that. And thank you all again for watching our podcast, our live video podcast. Please share with your friends. I mean, this is I think our 5th episode that we've done. Everyone has had such wonderful nuggets of insight and tools and resources and things that I think we can all connect to that we've been through. So I'm sure there's other people out there that can benefit from hearing the stories, the real stories from real people of what they've been through. So share and like, of course, we'd like some likes and some loves. And we will see you next week. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.